Hi, in today's video I thought I'd show you how to make your printed text look a little bit cooler. So there's a few different ways you can do text, and it depends completely on what you're trying to get out of the text itself, whether it's a logo, or whether it's lettering, whether it's a present to someone. It's going to be an object that actually sits on a shelf or somewhere, or whether it's embedded into a different sort of product that you're making. So I'm going to flash up some examples on the screen and sort of show you the different types of text, and then we're obviously going to go back to how we can make that text look slightly cooler. So for example, you can emboss text, and on this feet logo here, what we can see is the text has been embossed. Now this is an incredibly zoomed in picture, and so not the best quality. This can be a really good way of showing text. You get a bit of shadow, which is quite nice. You obviously don't have to have the same color. You can make it stick out in different multi-colors. That's quite good. Whereas if you deboss something like this, for example, this ambient logo here, that's obviously debossed. Now you could go to the effect of actually cutting the lettering behind, so you could get a multicolor effect there. With debossing, I sort of recommend keeping it one colour. It's nice, you get the different shadows, and as you change your perspective on it, it can obviously cast the light slightly differently. Another example of that, debossing is great for sort of inscripting specification text onto things, or if you're printing a part. The easiest way to put text into an object, in my opinion, is to just deboss it. We use debossing just to catch the eye and just to put our logos on the things that we make. This is a holder for an adapter in the van, in the rig, and we just put our FYDS on that part. We similarly have done it on a bracket for the light extrusions as well. Another cool way to put text in something is to cut it out. So you can see here I started with what would essentially be just like a rectangle, and I cut the letters out all the way through. Now, word of warning, you can only actually do this with certain letters. You couldn't obviously do this with the letter O because it would be floating. You could put little strands in top and bottom, but then it's very obvious that you've done that. That might be a design choice that you choose to make, and one that, you know, could look quite nice. Another way to do letters, and probably if I'm designing a product and someone wants some really nice lettering, this is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. Now we have to consider its print orientation here. So I printed this, as you can see from the texture, bedside down, so the lettering was obviously inversed, so it's printing in multi-material here, so the white, the green, so on and so forth. What this will do is make a really nice border between the two materials, and it can be really quite crisp. If you're not getting the crispness of the lettering here, I would suggest you lower your nozzle diameter. You're not talking about the layer lines and the height here, we're talking about the diameter of the nozzle. So a 0.4 nozzle will have a minimum fillet to the edge of sharp curves. 0.2 will have a slightly finer resolution to that. Flush lettering, in my opinion, just looks really quite nice and is great for sort of products that you want a slightly higher end feel to them. This is a sign that we made for the van. It's an on-air sign, and it's probably one of my favourite things in the van, in the rig, sorry I should say. But this utilised that flush effect to create what's essentially a light box. There's an LED strip behind there, and it shines through the green and the white, and obviously it won't shine through that black. I made the green and the white quite thin to make sure the light did get through, and I got quite a good resolution on the corners. You can see there's a slight bit of filleting, but not too much. Lastly, of course, you can just print standalone letters and screw them to the wall, as I have done here. You're limited by the bed size of your printer. We've got a H2D here and a H2S here, so the bed size is sort of, you know, in the 300s kind of thing, and therefore you're limited there. You could obviously do them in parts and screw them together, but I've never been able to get quite a nice seam, and it'll be very obvious that you've actually seamed those two parts together. So letters that are standalone need to be joined together, and that's kind of where we're going today with this video, is how to make your lettering that's joined together look just slightly different. In this instance, it's flush, and it works quite well because the G, the and the T, I purposely did it in this sort of cursive font that the and flows nicely into the T. It's all the same height. It looks purposeful. especially with sans serif text where it's so linear, you can sometimes lose the edge of letters, and that's kind of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to jump into our design software, and I'm going to show you how to recreate these letters and the considerations I made, and then we're going to talk about how we actually print them, so the best orientation and things like that. So I'm using a Rhino to do this today, and I will say just before we begin, the principles of doing this are going to be pretty similar in most other 3D design softwares. I might say some phrases or types of commands that will be Rhino specific. So in your software, whatever one you're using, you might find you have to do a different button or type in a different command or something like that. So with that being said, let's get started. Several ways to do the text would be, I could have put the text on the front here, I could have put the text across all of the different plinths. I wanted the text to stand out, I wanted it to sort of capture the eye, and I think this device of insetting and sort of staggering the letters as you go through the actual text string is going to really catch the eye. One thing to note when you're actually 3D printing text, as we've mentioned, is these objects aren't against the background, which of course means they're sort of freestanding, and therefore they needed to be connected. And that means that they would have to touch, if I just zoom into this really quickly, that means they would have to touch. And if they're in the same plane, I think they would not stand out as much. I think they wouldn't cast the shadows that they're casting. I quite like the fact that some are bigger than the others as well. So let's jump into it and see what we get to. First thing I'm going to do is jump into the top view, and I'm going to make a text object. I would like it to say our models. To make it easier for myself, I could do this so we know that it's going to sit one above the other. I'm going to have these as curves. I'm not going to group them, and I'm going to give them a rough height of say 20 mil each. Apply that and stick that down. Normally what I start to do now is actually move the letters and make them clash into each other so that when we are printing them they stick to one another. Essentially we've got to have a join between the letters. The actual first thing I'm going to do is make sure that they're all aligned across the bottom. Another little quick tip when you're moving text and you know you've got inset things, I didn't do it just then, make sure that you select the inner object and the outer object, because I just got caught out there myself. So I'm just going to zip through this. Brilliant, now we've got that done, I'm going to trim these objects so they've got a flat base. That was me being lazy there. Join them up so they're solid object. Cool, okay. Let's start clashing these into one another now that we know they're on the same plane. And you can either move them using the move tool. I like to use the gimbal tool and sort of eye it through and just sort of roughly inset it. I'm not looking to achieve sort of a massive inset. I only want it to kind of just clip it really. So about there is good. And then same with the D. So probably overset that a little bit. This one as well. Straight lines are always quite nice because they obviously being straight can touch all the way down a face. What I'd say to these ones, especially with letters like this, is I generally like to make sure if we're going to print this and want it to be strong, say for example it wasn't on that shelf, you're doing this in isolation, the more overlap you give it, the stronger it's going to be. So with something like this, I would tend to make sure I clip this bottom edge of the E as well as the top edge. But you don't want to take away from the shape of the letter as well, because people recognize the shapes of letters like visually. So that's looking good. Let's do the top one. I'm going to clash these into there. I like to leave a little bit out. That kind of creates a little funky edge. You could bury that in there like that. That could be a strong way to do it, but I kind of like the fact that that's going to print this sort of intersection here. I think it's going to be quite nice. And then the R, you'll notice on the other one I said that there's sometimes different heights. If I just put that next to each other like that, you're going to get no differentiation in that edge there. So I'm actually going to scale this up. I'm going to use the scale tool, not in one direction because I want it to grow all together. I'm just going to scale it up so it just pokes above it like that. Again, giving it a little bit of disparity. We also obviously need to overset the letter just very slightly in this case. And I'm going to see where I can put these. Now, I remember this being a bit of a problem when I did it in the beginning, the O and the U fitting between what is the M and the top of that letter D there. Okay, I'm actually going to scale this down just a little bit. Just a touch. And I'll make that sit like this. Now, what you don't want is to have objects like this floating with nothing there. So we want to make sure that when we do it, we haven't got a join between the letters. That U is actually going to be inside that D there. That's going to make sure that we don't have a weird projection halfway through this, which kind of wouldn't make sense. I'm hiding the projection there and just making it sort of sit inside that D there. That's going to kind of get rid of the majority of this D, which we don't want. So when we're extruding the letters, we want to make sure that the D is outward from the O and the U and the R. Next thing I wanted to do is just move this O slightly over so it's not clipping that U as much. We've got a nice overhang here, we've got a little shadow gap there. If anything, I could raise those up, but I'm not going to, and the R's peeking through here. I like the gap of all of this, and so what I'm going to do now is switch to a 3D view, and I'm just going to zoom in on that. We obviously need to rotate this because it's lying flat at the moment, so I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees in the vertical axis. I'm then going to start to extrude the letters forward. This may be different if you want a 3D object front and back. I'm only concerned, as this one, about the front of it. The back is actually going to line up flat like that. So that's a good example of how these letters would look actually if they weren't extruded differently. So if you did want a front and back sort of 3D object, you're probably going to want to do this slightly differently. What I'm going to do is essentially just extrude the letters forward by different amounts. So I'm going to pick my M and my D, and remember to make sure you select any objects inside those letters. I've been caught out several times before. I'm going to extrude them probably 7mm. Then the next letters that I would like are going to be the O and probably the L. And I'm going to extrude them forward maybe 6mm and see how that looks. So that's leaving a slight shadow gap there. I want to make sure that that O is forward from it, so I'm going to extrude that forward 6.5. So we've got a little bit, oh, excuse me, that went backwards. So we've got a little bit of an overhang, but not much. So it's slightly behind the M and the D, but in front of that O. This U definitely wants to sit backwards from both of them, so that's going to go forward 5mm, like that. And then I probably want the R sticking forward just slightly from the U like this. So I can put that forward 5.5. And we're starting to get our 3D kind of discrepancy between the faces of the letters. Now, I probably put this E, let's try 5, see what happens. Yeah, we're kind of losing that E. How did I do it over here? Yeah, okay. I might make that go forward 6mm. I'm not liking the fact that that L is there, so I might actually scale 1D, and I'm just going to put that backwards. That was extruded to 6, I'm actually going to make it 5. And so therefore we probably want this S to be 5.5, just briefly sits in front of DL like that. So as we look down it, if I select this one, I can rotate from here. As we look down it, we can see we've got difference in the front plane of these letters, and we've got a 3D object. The fact that I flatten this off would mean that if we were to print this on some sort of base, if I had it on some sort of base like that, it would naturally cut off that bottom line, so we've got it all flush essentially. A tip for printing into a base like this is I would actually grab all of these letters and I would sink them down. Let's do 0.5. What that's going to do is clash these objects into this base. So for example, if this base was black and these letters were white, so we're doing multicolor printing, it would just notch into this black base using your slicer, and it would say, okay, there's something here that I'm going to print in a different color. It would start to print that different color, and that means that as it prints, it's going to adhere to that base much better. What you don't want to happen is you just stick the letters on top. So if we undid that, we stick that letter on top, and you can see this O barely has a contact patch here. And I think if you were to print that, because it's locked into the other letters, it might be okay in this instance. But if this was just by itself, it would definitely 100% just snap off. There's no contact between the base and the letter. So just by sinking it down a little bit, you're actually creating more of an adhesion, and it kind of looks cool in my opinion as well. So several things you could do here. You could have all the letters individually. So if you're doing multicolor printing, you could keep them all individual. We could Boolean union just the bottom lot. So we could have two colors essentially, R being say white and models being say black. If I was to remove the base, we could do that. So we could union them together, and that means that for all intents and purposes they are one object and they're a closed poly surface. That's what we're looking for. So that means that we'd want to Boolean union the top as well. We've essentially now only, if I was to select this, got two poly surfaces there, and they are both closed. Something else you could do is you could union the lot for a single color, and that would look like that. Now we've got one closed poly surface. And lastly, I'd like to sort of talk about how we're actually going to print this. If we were to print this upright like that, when I did this shelf here, it actually put in quite a few supports for things like the place of the R, the top of the O, this O, that D, the E, and the SS, essentially the projections and the overhangs. That actually came out really well, as you can see in the photo here. It was slightly hairy. I had to kind of go around with a scalpel and just clean it up a little bit, but I wasn't unimpressed with the quality of it. I thought it came out quite well. The best way to do this, if you wanted this as a standalone object, would be, as we've got a flat back and we've just got these front letters that are extruded, is I would print it laying down like that. So your print surface, the bed side essentially is going to be that flat back, and then it's going to print upwards, and it will do a nice finishing layer. You could set it to iron, the top surfaces being nice and clean. Obviously your layer is going to be going this way, so there's no overhangs. It's just going to print up. It will require no support, and it'll print quite nicely. And just to say that I'll put this model on our Google Drive, and the link will be in the description. So if you wanted to download it and see how it's built, I'll include this stand and the things you can investigate that as well. Thank you very much for watching today. If you've got any questions about anything I've covered, leave it in the comments below and I'll respond to you. See you in the next one.